Hello, everyone. Um, yes, so I'm a landscape architect. When I was a teenager, my parents sent off to Bup for all of our talents. As I have a family of five sisters and me, and I got back architecture, and I was kind of surprised because, well, yeah, I like architecture, but actually I've always loved nature and the outdoors. So for me, I decided to pursue landscape architecture. So I took art and biology and geography as my A levels. Um, and it was a really nice combination of subjects to explore the relationship of people and the environment. Um, so I've been a practicing landscape architect now for about 24 years. And I've worked in many different places. I've worked in private practice over in America and over here in England. I've worked in an environmental charity for a few years in London, concentrating on sort of social regeneration projects. Um, and I've now been in Portsmouth City Council on the south coast of England for about 10 years. I started off as the principal landscape or senior landscape architect, and I've moved up to becoming the team leader of the landscape architects there. Um, we there's a team of us three landscape architects there, within a bigger design team of architects and landscape architects, quantity surveyors who measure and build things, and civil structural engineers. So it's a multidisciplinary design team, and many councils in Britain no longer have their own design teams, so it's quite unusual for us still to be there in the council in Portsmouth. But we work very closely with lots of different departments in the council. So with housing and transport, with coastal defences, with parks and open spaces, education, planning and regeneration. So it's quite diverse. It's um, it's a wonderful. No 2 days are the same. Every day is quite different, and I have about 15 different active projects at any one time, all at different stages of delivery. Some of them I'm working on a concept design for, or I'm discussing what the scope of the project is with the people that we're working for. Other projects are further down the detailing of a project, or then maybe we're applying for planning permission, or we may be actually at the stage of tendering it. That means going out to the market and getting prices back, or we may be actually implementing it. So it's I feel like I'm a very busy cook sometimes with about 15 different pots on stove, just trying to keep them all going at the same time, trying to work out which ones to prioritize and that sort of thing. It's a very enjoyable job, and the reason I came to, having tried out private practice and all these other different things, they all have their pros and cons. I'm really aware of that. But what I noticed with private practice, for me personally, I was getting frustrated with how everything comes down to the bottom line of money. It's always about how much can you eke out of a project. And often as a landscape architect, you feel like you're right at the bottom of the pecking order. So everybody else or everything else gets far more priority. And then if there's a little bit of room, a little bit of budget left to do the planting, great, we'll do that. So I would find that quite frustrating. It's not a very satisfying way to work. And as a landscape architect, what I believe, I think many landscape architects feel this way, is very passionate about what we do, because we're really, if we're given the opportunity, we're actually integral to the whole of the project. We can help shape how a project will really feel from the outset. We can help place the buildings correctly. We can help direct the relationship of the open space that knits all of the buildings together. And I think people are starting to really realize this now, and they're giving much more chance for the landscape architects to hold the project together. So now we end up managing all these different people with their different skill sets, because each of them are important to a project. Can't build a wall without consulting a structural engineer, for example. But what we do is to help bring all those different people together and engage, because as a landscape architect you have to think about how people relate to their environment very much. So there is a bit like what Stephen was saying, that space between things, when you bring it right down to distill it down to the most basic. That's what we often find we are doing in landscape architecture as well. We're looking at the relationship between things and the energy that comes between. It's about people and their environment. And what's also interesting about landscape architecture, for which I said before, is the natural environment. So there's nothing quite so mysterious and amazing as nature, and trying to design with it is quite something to learn, because plants, as you know, they grow. They start from very small and they grow big, and they have different sort of forms. Some of them grow big, some of them spread out wide, some of them have amazing leaves, some of them have amazing colors, some of them die off in the winter time, and then what do you do? Do you need something else to complement them? So it's really interesting working with plants as a kind of design material, but also we work with hard materials. So we're looking at paving and surfacing, site furniture. We're also looking at things like bollards and fences, pergolas, things made of timber, things made of metal, things made of stone and concrete. We have to understand how things are retained, how structures are retained. So how you build a wall that will hold up the soil next to it, changes in levels. We have to understand about contouring and the capacity of the soil. What each the soil changes wherever you are, depending on the underlying geology. So do you have a clay soil that you're working with, or do you have a very sandy soil? What sort of things, how will that affect the plants that you're going to try and grow in it, or the structures that you're going to try and build on it? Oak trees, for example, can affect the quality of the soil of about 50 meters in any direction from where their trunk is, because they draw water in. And so that has a vast effect on things like clay soils, for example, and what you can put in that sort of environment without the soil shrinking or changing. So lately I'm working on some hospital projects, which are with external clients outside of Portsmouth. So we've got 2 therapeutic gardens which we're building for about £300,000 total. One of them is a pediatric garden, so for children, and the other one is it's a larger garden space which is going to be used for patients and staff to come out, and visitors to have a place to reflect on, to rest, to actually take some space, and feel a little bit of healing. And it's a really exciting project for us to sort of think about those sorts of qualities and the sort of needs of those people. So we're working with a local blacksmith to Portsmouth, to create some sort of lovely metalwork as sort of sculpture. We're looking at restoring an old weather vane that was part of the old hospital. And we're doing lots of beautiful planting to kind of give people a sense of that rest and that rejuvenation that they need. So I'll show you I'll try and share my screen and show you a couple of pictures.
Do you deal with smell a lot?
Yes, definitely.
The influence of different plants and how they make you feel?
Definitely, and especially in a garden like a therapeutic garden, it's very important that that's a really significant way for people to feel good, is to smell beautiful plants. So, I mean, there are lots of different aspects to it, but that and the texture of plants, how they feel soft or how they feel prickly, um, the way they move in the wind. I use grasses a lot because I really love the way they move. They remind me of the sea, which I'm very fond of. But I also like using contrasting forms, so quite bold leafed things along with quite fine leafed or fine textured plants, things that change in the color of the season. So you might have something, a tree, which can give you some spring flowering, but also some autumn coloring. And I work very much, it's context related, context based. So it really depends on the sort of needs of each site. I'll show you a few images of the sort of projects that we've been working on. No, where's that gone? Hold on. So, I'm not sure. Can you see this on your screens? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So this is just some school projects that we worked on over the last few years, creating sort of different environments for children. Sometimes we have to use materials that I'm not always very fond of, but things like artificial grass. A lot of schools are paranoid about having natural grass areas, so they ask us to use materials which we have to kind of compromise on. But that's natural grass down there on the bottom left, and we like to play with lighting as well. So we work with our architectural colleagues to come up with sort of dramatic things. This is a therapeutic garden for a school where they were doing lots of teaching, growing plants for cooking and harvesting, and having a space for quiet. This was a project where we had to bridge a gap between two parts of the school using different canopies to make a kind of covered place for them to walk between the buildings using lighting, and we like playing with the different shapes and colors. And then doing things with play and trying to make better entrances for schools so that they actually feel like this is my main entrance, do come in here, you know, welcome people in. Adventure playgrounds. We work very much with natural materials where we can, big boulders or robinia, which is a hardwood which comes from the European continent, and sort of galvanized steel. And then I've talked about planting, but I use a lot of pine trees in Portsmouth because we're by the coast and they grow very well. They take very poor soils. They take very strong salt winds, and they seem to be able to withstand everything. I talked about grasses as well, so I try to use those to create kind of a foil within the pine trees, or within using shingle as a beach shingle as a mulch on the planting beds. Try and give people the sense of that they're by the sea. I use sketches quite a lot to give people a feeling of what things might look like. So these are some sketches we did for the Seafront master plan in Portsmouth some years ago. What I've been involved with over the last 5 years in Portsmouth is the sea defences. We have to raise the land in Portsmouth because it's quite low lying. Lots of people live there. It's quite a high centre of population, and so there is a requirement to try and protect it. So what our role as a landscape architect is to try and make those sea defences a bit more interesting, lively, interactive, and also fit their environment. So we did a whole character assessment of the seafront to assess what is its existing value, what is its intrinsic value. We come up with lots of different character types. About in Portsmouth, there's lots of old history with wonderful big naval defences. King Henry VIII built a castle down there, and lots of interesting things to see. And yet you've also got long stretches of shingle beach in between, and some strange things like the piers, the fun fairs, which are a bit odd, some of them, but they're important to people. They create a kind of part of their social culture, which is important. So we have to look at everything and assess it. Is there a quality there which is needing something? Is it actually in a place of transition? Is it actually a place of conservation? And then we come up with looking at, as I said, specific needs of a place. Do they need to be enhanced or strengthened, or they're actually quite strong as they are, and do we just need to conserve them? So then we worked on some initial ideas for the seafront some years ago. Some of them get quite wild and exciting, but they'll end up being probably tamed back because of value engineering, where you can't pay for everything.
Yeah. Vincent, Vincent, I was down in Portsmouth. Sorry, Steve Dance again. I was down in Portsmouth in the last 18 months, and I visited this exhibition one afternoon. There was a consultation exercise going on.
All right.
Has it developed into anything, or is it still sitting there being thought about?
It's going ahead. We're starting with the first phase of South Sea at the moment. It's already started on site. Yeah. It's they're huge and complex projects, so they can take years to kind of go through the process. I know you were involved in planning, Steve, so you know that. But yeah, they can be about 5 years to get off the ground, and they're multi-million-pound projects, so it's quite complicated. Lots of different people involved. Up on the north and east of Portsmouth, where I've been also working on the coastal defences, you'll see the existing character of places is much quieter, much more informal, more a different kind of character. So we want to make sure that we work with that as well. So we looked at sort of simple sketches about raising bunds and embankments using stone revetments, so big boulders, trying to knit together new soil mounds that could then be planted in using wildflowers and native plants. So it's going to become more naturalized. It's much less about making big statements that are for the history or for the conservation of a monument. It's more about looking after the kind of natural character of a place. So that's that one. The other one I was going to show you.
When we talked earlier, because Vincent came on at very short notice, because we did have somebody else, but they weren't able to do it. So Vincent very kindly came on this afternoon, and he talked about synergy. Do you remember that?
One of the things I've experienced, you asked about how do we experience the Latina in our work, and I think there are many ways, but for me, I've noticed that in recent years, I've started to see a kind of synergy happening when I'm in the right flow of being in a good state for my work. I notice that I have an effect on the people around me and the situations that are happening, and the design or the kind of process of a project going together. It seems to create this interesting energy where people get involved. They want to get, they find out about it. They're really interested. They want to engage. They want to give us money to do more work. We get a lot of repeat work. So it's like people are starting to feel something, and I can't explain it other than thinking that there must be some kind of, there must be something that they're experiencing from me and from the kind of work that I am involved in doing that seems to be of benefit for people. And I'm really interested in sometimes just, I end up facilitating meetings often now for the whole design team, where I help the process of the discussion. Sometimes it's just about saying a certain thing at a certain point and realizing that it needed to go in a certain direction, and somehow it's working. I can't put it very well, but I notice that it's happening, and it feels like it's coming from inside. I just feel like I'm growing in my confidence with it, and growing in the kind of understanding that I have for what people need. Sometimes it's about recognizing the sensitivities of where somebody is at and being able to encourage them to come out of themselves. Some of the more junior architects or landscape architects, I'm often very aware that they need encouragement, and so I will pull them in to actually get involved in a project and then ask them to talk about it or share what their experience is with it. And it's to get them more confident about what they're doing. I always feel like the design work that I'm involved in, and I experience it in Susila Dharma as well, the teamwork is so much more important than the actual personal accomplishments. So I feel really valued by the kind of rapport and the experience of collaborating with people. This is our hospital garden for the pediatric ward. It's very, very long and narrow. And so it's a space that has already had some kind of design in the past, but everything failed. And so what we're trying to do is to rejuvenate the place with a lot more vitality. So a nice big piece of play equipment for children to climb on, a shade canopy, which will mean they can actually sit out there when it's super hot. Some fun graphic panels on the glazing walls, a lovely planting to move in the wind and give them color, and things that have to be quite drought tolerant, because up there on the deck where the pediatric garden is, it's so exposed and windy, things will just dry out like that. So we have to be aware of that kind of thing. And the main garden, as I said before, is a sort of more contemplative place to come out and take respite. So we're working with a blacksmith to restore the weather vane, and also to create some interesting kind of shapes that we will set within the planting, within sort of rock gardens and pergolas around the edges, to create a kind of partial screen that frames the garden, makes you feel like you're a bit separated away from the parked cars around, and gives you a sense of quiet. And then using some of the memorial stones that were important to the hospital in their old scheme. So yeah, I think that's all I really need to say for now. I'm happy to take any questions if you've got any.
That garden there looked very interesting.
Yeah, we're trying to think about. I mean, it's not always curves. It's not always orthogonal shapes. It really is led very much by what will suit a space, what's the existing character of that space, and trying to work with that. So I used curves there because existing paths were all curved and we're on a hill, so you're never going to get a complete, it's not like a formal garden with parterre and hedges. You're just not going to get that kind of feel. So using terraces or more effective.
Okay, hello Vincent, it's James here. I'm just interested actually, because I go down to Portsmouth a lot because I write military books. So it's sort of like the headquarters of the Royal Navy. So is any of your work, do you get influenced by what the Royal Navy want and the historic significance of Portsmouth? Because I know a lot about the area, like, you know, Hayling Islands and Emsworth, and there's some old Mulberry Harbour casements in Langston Harbour. Do you get influenced by any of that in your work or not?
Very much.
Interested.
Yeah, very much. It's interesting you asked, James, because the coastal defences that are down, like the historic defences down in Old Portsmouth, are amazing, and you probably have seen them, but they're lovely forms quite high up, amazing shapes if you look at them in plan, big strong embankments with brick walls and stone walls, and it's very formal, quite powerful places. So I've tried to use some of that to has inspired me on some of the eastern coastal defences to make promontories. So because we're having to build concrete walls to raise the defences, where we haven't got room to make embankments, we just literally have to build on the harbour edge. We're using, I'm taking the path away from the wall, the coast path, and raising up the level of the coast path so that people can get a sense of elevation. And we make these kind of mini fort type things, which are sort of inspired by what's down at Southsea with the old castle embankments and the batteries, ramparts for the castle. So it has a lot of, I'm very influenced by the places that I visit, by the places that I see. And because Portsmouth, you know, it has that kind of historic context, it seems really appropriate to use that sort of language. So using natural stone.
I mean, it's a very unique place, actually, Portsmouth. So, you know, if you want to know anything about some of the history of it, I'll have a chat with you about it, because I know a lot about the area. Like Southwark House, you know where Southwark House is, do you? Do you know Southwark House? Yeah. Interesting place, actually. Interesting area you're living in, really.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Vincent.
You're welcome.
That was quite fascinating.
Just want to say it was beautiful, Vinny. The pictures of the things you're doing, it's really uplifting and quite exciting to see. And I was walking today near a playground, and I was wondering if when you walk around places, if you're kind of checking out the playground and the verges, and how, like, everywhere you go, you probably like check it out to reflect and get some idea of what other places are doing.
Yes, I get great inspiration from visiting other places, and it's also impossible not to kind of notice the materials that people use. Oh wow, look at the technique they've used for finishing off that wood. Or like Stephen was showing with the beautiful techniques for making those guitars, I noticed all of the kind of detailing of bollards. I know bollards are really boring to most of us, but there's some really interesting techniques that people use, and different materials. So we're using Corten steel on some of the, which is steel that naturally rusts. It's really, really nice. So I'm enjoying that kind of thing on the sea defences. It just, can't help but be inspired by visiting other places that are really good. And also seeing things that don't work. You can learn an awful lot from mistakes that we each make. You know, what things haven't worked, what things haven't lasted, and what things are still lacking in real soul or character. And so you can really learn a lot from that too.